right, welcome everyone to the 4th annual Berea Book Fest. Today I have the honor of introducing Kay Bruce Florence. She was reared in Harlan County, Kentucky. She received her master's degree from Georgetown College and studied in the EKU MFA program. She was awarded the Katherine Petit Medallion for short story. Her poetry has appeared in several journals, including Appalachian Heritage. She is the author of a cookbook, which I'd really like to see that, a poetic novel narrative, Waiting for Daylight, and a novel, Fleetie's Crossing, which she'll be reading from today. She currently writes a column for her local newspaper, is an elder in her church, and works retail in her daughter's vintage collectible shop. She's working on another poetic novel and on the story of George Ella Lyon's relationship with her writing teacher, her mentor, and Miss Florence's mother. And apart from that introduction, I'd like to say that I know Miss Florence personally, and I know her family personally, and I've had the honor of sitting down with several family members and listened to a lot of rich and colorful history, including her father, who was a judge, Edward Hill, in Harlan County, and there's lots of stories surrounding that, and her mother, who was a writing teacher and mentor to George Ella Lyon, who was last year's Kentucky State Poet Laureate. So please give everyone a warm welcome to Kay Bruce Florence.
Thank you so much, Athena. It's such a pleasure to be here. I was so excited to be invited. And my two daughters, they were excited too when I was invited, and they both said, we'll be there. And then life rises up. We all know about life. And neither one of them could be here. And then I was surprised with my precious nephew, and he's sitting back there. Olin came, and he walked in the door, and oh, okay, girls, stay home. I've got him. Okay, the rich heritage of the Appalachian region can never be told enough. This book, Fleetie's Crossing, takes the reader deep into the forces that destroyed the land to such a great extent, destroyed the workers and the families in the 1940s and the early 50s. The genesis of the outmigration was sparked and fed by the ancient mountain enemy, greed. This novel tells a story of the whys of this migration of the 40s and 50s. It's seen from the viewpoint of two families, both devastated by the circumstances that sent one away and trapped the other. Two families give us a picture of the pressures that sent one family out and allowed the other to remain. Throughout the book, we see the disintegration of the tie between these two families. Rachel and Letha, the young girls, both 16, wanted to be blood sisters. And they portray this story for us through their lives. We see the division so evident today, and even in my home region. Their ultimate separation underscores the plight of all of us who had to choose whether to be off or here. And I often hear, I like to go to the Heinemann Writers Conference in the summertime, and I often hear the phrase, are you from off or are you from here? So that phrase, I know what that means to be, are you from off? So, well, today I'm here. So, as I said, this is about two families. One lives on one side of the crossing, another lives on the other. And the part that I'm going to read today is about a young lawyer and his daughter, and they live on one side of this crossing. The miners in this coal mining valley had been on strike for 6 months. Yesterday, Daddy, using his most persuasive lawyer skills, convinced Judge Harrison to issue an injunction to stem the violence at the picket line. In the middle of the morning, I heard the transmission grind and a muffled hump of tires as Daddy negotiated the car over the gullies and ruts of our steep road. He never came home during the day unless something was wrong. I ran to the door, but he was still sitting in the car. I pushed open the screen and walked to the edge of the porch and watched as he stepped out of the car. But he stopped. He turned and looked past the car and down into the valley spread out in front of him. And then he put his hands over his eyes, and I could see that he was crying. I started down the porch steps, but stopped. I had never seen my daddy cry. I cried, my sister cried, my brother cried, but my strong daddy, he never cried. I knew he would be embarrassed if he saw me see him crying, so I slipped back inside the front door and waited until he began walking up the porch steps. I pushed open the door, and he had wiped away the tears. His eyes were red and his complexion gray. The lines in his face seemed etched deeper than usual. His dark blonde hair showed the number of times he had run his fingers through it, and his wide shoulders were slumped. "There's a fresh pot of coffee on the stove, strong and dark the way you like it. Come sit at the table and I'll pour a cup for you." He nodded and looked at me for the first time. "That sounds good, Rachel. Why don't you have one with me? Sometimes I forget how grown up you are these days." "What's wrong, Daddy?" "Give me a minute." His voice sounded as if it was forced through gravel. He followed me into the kitchen. I walked to the counter and poured the coffee, and I set his cup on the table at his usual place. But when he came into the room, he sat in Mother's chair. He seemed too tired to walk to the head of the table. When I picked up his coffee and slid it toward him, he gripped my hand hard, and I swear I could feel his hurt through my sleeve. There was a hush in the room when I sat down beside him. "What happened?" The gravels in his voice were gone. It was soft and almost tender when he answered. "This morning, right after the injunction was issued, the striking miners went back to the picket line at Pridemore's. Sheriff Herschel Garber was waiting for them. You know, I've known Herschel all my life. He was a man you could trust. I knew I could depend on him to take care of the trouble at the mine." "Is that the Mr. Herschel who brought us doves after the last shoot?" Daddy nodded. "Herschel told the men they were not to carry weapons, and if they did, he would confiscate them. He promised to turn the scabs back, but he demanded there be no interference from anyone. If there was, he was going to arrest them on the spot. Herschel knew how the miners felt and told them he would not send them down the mountain until the scabs were gone." "You mean the picketers had to leave after all those weeks of walking that line day by day? You know that had to make them plenty mad. It's a wonder they didn't start shooting everybody right then," I said. "Well, Herschel had it worked out that after the scabs hightailed it back down to town, all but 2 of the picketers had to leave. That way, they wouldn't have to walk away with the scabs yelling all that filth at them." "Did that help? Did they really agree to what Herschel wanted?" "Yes, it seemed so. Herschel climbed in his car, placed his shotgun on the seat beside him, and drove down the hill. He turned his car sideways to block the road so he could stop anyone from ramming a truck all the way to the mine face. Anyone like Daniel, he'd do anything he could to cause trouble." Daddy nodded, but he didn't say anything for a long time. I sat there, really hesitant to move. After he'd taken my arm the way he did, I had the feeling that he wanted someone near. That it was me was a surprise, but I was here and Mother wasn't. Finally, I broke the silence. What did they do when he left? Well, the miners broke apart their wall of men and scattered. It had to be killing them to stand back and let the sheriff do their fighting. But each one, to a man, wanted to pull out a weapon and plunge to the middle of a fight to drive the scabs back down the mine road. The truck loaded with Pridemore scabs stopped on the hill in front of the Herschel's car. He got out and stepped 3 steps to the side of the truck and spoke to the driver. He said, "You go tell your boss this fight has gone to the courts. Judge decided there'll be no work in this mine for 60 days, and if he has any objection, he will have to take it up with the judge." Then he told the driver and the scabs crowding the truck bed, "I have to do my duty, and I'd a whole lot rather do it peaceful, but I can go the other way if you push it." Daddy went on. The driver spit out a string of goddams and hellfires enough to make the devil blush. But Herschel just stood there, not moving. He'd heard it all before. He wasn't about to shoot a man because of his grammar. The truck finally backed down the hill and onto the county road and headed toward town. Herschel was as good as his word, and just as soon as the truck was out of sight, he told the men, the striking miners, to go on home. After an hour, all the men but 2 had left the mountain, and Herschel decided to go back to town and send a deputy out to keep watch. Well, wasn't that the end of it after they all left? I asked. That's what we all thought, but I guess it was way too easy. His car bounced over the deep ruts and rocks to the bottom of the steep road, and he turned toward town on the county road. About 2 miles from the mine, you know where the road dips real low near the water? Yes, that's where Logan always hides his eyes because he thinks we're going in the water. Well, maybe Logan has second sight about that dip because Herschel must have seen a fishing boat moored near the road and slowed down to wave. A vote is a vote, and he never hesitates to let people know he's on the job. As he rounded the sharp curve just beyond the dip, the Pridemore man pulled his now empty truck. Want me to stop? Okay. Well, I'll just stop. Okay. They're for sale. Yes, I'd love to. I would love to. Ocala's beautiful this time of year.
Could you just say, how do you talk a little about the research versus the fiction?
Everything in the book that's in the book happened, but it didn't happen within that time frame. There's a mine explosion in this book. There's also an episode where Rachel and her friend Letha go to a snake handling service. That's in there, and that actually did happen. The mine wars continued, and there are more episodes with that. There's a murder in it that actually did really happen. And it happened, but it didn't happen in that time frame.
And you're inventing the 2 girls.
No, they're not invented. Okay. They're real people.
They are, but you're inventing the dialogue.
Yes,
and
yes, yeah, they're real people. Okay, thank you for the question.
Hey, Aunt Boo, I have one more question.
Yes.
You're selling that book?
Yes, they're for sale.
I'd like to buy everybody the book.
Oh.
So.
Take the money over there for it.
Yeah.
Well, everybody go line up.
Okay.
You get one. You can find out what happened to Herschel.
Yeah.
Oh, how wonderful.
Inside.
When
Amanda? Yeah, you get one for me, I got a sticker.
It was, yeah, it